got a presentation from Paul, and it's your call.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. So the title of my presentation, Who Wants to Save $1 Billion, $1 billion plus dollars? I think that we are stuck in a paradigm that is so about expanding infrastructure that we can't afford when there's things we'd like to do with that money that we don't get the opportunity to do. And so the focus for today is about how we save a lot of money by doing things differently, by changing the paradigm of how we use the transport system. So if I can have the next, can I control the slide?
Yes, with the mouse.
Excellent. So I'm here to ask you to consider doing a pilot project with reverse tolls. And if you had the opportunity to read the material I put out, this is in the context of the transport pricing project. And there's three potential futures that we see in front of us. One is the status quo. One is we continue to have congestion. We continue to spend at least $1 billion in expanding infrastructure. And we continue to develop a risk of those assets becoming stranded. In other words, losing their value at some point in the future with the arrival of robocabs and a complete disruption to the transport system. The second future is one with road pricing, which is a lot of excitement about this idea, because if we can figure out how to get people to pay for things, we can build even more infrastructure, increase the risk of the amount of assets that are at risk of becoming stranded, and at the same time do stuff people hate by requiring every car to be capable of being charged. But the goal here is very much about having more money to spend on more infrastructure. Or another alternative way in front of us is that we change the way that we collectively use our road system. A future, in this case, I'm suggesting with what I call reverse tolls. Instead of a charging regime, a paying regime. In order to do this, we would need some sort of an app for tagging on and tagging off and being absolutely confident that people are sharing rides and not driving on their own, and knowing that with confidence. Paying them, buying them, paying people for reducing congestion rather than charging people to buy reduced congestion. And paying at sufficient scale to decongest the roads. And I estimate that cost would be in the order of $100 million a year. Significant saving over what's being spent expanding the roads. And this would remove the need for expanding infrastructure, and therefore it would reduce the stranding risk on the arrival of robocabs. So what I've done is try to do something really quickly for you, and with only 5 minutes, I'm limited in how much I can share with you, or hope to, and Councillor Darby kindly told me that my slide is far too busy and I've tried to cover far too many points. So I'm not going to cover all of these, but I know you can all read quickly and see what I'm talking about. But 3 columns, one for each of the futures, and 10 different dimensions: people in cars, everyone else, politicians, that's you guys, engineers and contractors, the environment, and so on. And what I've done, you'll see, and hopefully you can read that. Basically, red means, kind of not doing too well. Orange means kind of not so bad, but maybe okay. And green means happy and moving forward. And the engineers and contractors, we can see, are definitely not doing too badly right now, spending at least $1 billion a year, and managing the future program. What we've got is the infrastructure. It's overused, but kind of if you were the infrastructure perspective, you'd be saying, but I'm getting expanded by $1 billion a year, so this is pretty exciting. But otherwise, people are pretty upset about being stuck in traffic and so on. I don't need to go through those because you know the status quo. And the thing is, that is one of our potential futures. A road pricing regime where we charge people for access to the roads. People hate tolls, let's face it, we know that. And we only see 2 bits of green showing up here now. We see the engineers and contractors still, and we see infrastructure, less wear and tear, and even more money being spent expanding the infrastructure. We see the environment is a little bit happier because it's got less congestion, but actually there's even more congestion, more added resources, infrastructure being built. And now we get to the third one, which is, what does success look like? Success looks like everybody's happy. Even the engineers and contractors are happy in an environment where we're not spending money expanding our transportation infrastructure. They are busy, they've been redeployed to fix housing and water and sewage. But there's a whole number of different ways that make this a very exciting, possible, successful future, with a paying regime where we're paying people to travel as passengers and know that they are. And so what I'm proposing to you today is that you, not NZTA or AT, not the Smarter Transport Pricing Project, but you choose to test this project, test this idea out with a pilot project. A 6 to 12 month project, you would be looking at getting, should I just stop?
No, just
Getting all people who are already carpooling. There are some 20,000 people already carpooling in Auckland. Choose a corridor that you would like to decongest and go out and reward people for traveling as passengers on that corridor until you achieve the traffic levels that you wish to achieve. And so rather than turning this over to the transport pricing project, which I'm afraid is going to take a year before it's even ready to start thinking about doing a pilot, you do a pilot to find out if this works or not in the meantime, and then when they're ready to decide, they know that it's got some legs. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And you didn't show the really busy slides. That was quite good.
They are there.
But we have got
reference.
the message, and we've got it in our presentation that you've distributed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Members, are there questions of Paul on this concept? Councillor Walker.
Sure. Got a question, Paul, and I note that you mentioned Whangaparo Road up there as a candidate for a trial, and I certainly agree with that. What do we need to do to take this a step further and conceivably to have a pilot?
Decide that you're interested enough to do it, first of all, and then I think we analyze each of those routes and look for each of the potential routes. If it was to be Whangaparo Peninsula, I would be looking at the actual existing traffic flows, looking at what the potential is, where those people are going to, and what the potential is for sharing. So we could predict what sort of cost it would involve, and then going out and testing that theory. And what you're looking at is I'm suggesting an app that people would download for free. They would use that app to record their trips as carpool passengers, as carpoolers, and we would be basically setting up a paying regime where we reward them for doing that behavior. And then you would look at whatever mechanisms necessary to have as many people informed as possible about that opportunity, and you'd see over time that shift of people into being passengers.
Related question through you, Mr. Chair. So obviously you're having some point of engagement with us right now. The other player of substance is Auckland Transport. Have you approached them, and is there something that we could do to enhance that engagement?
I'm sceptical about Auckland Transport's interest in pursuing this, and therefore that's why I'm talking to you and not Auckland Transport. I think, the thing is that the continued expansion of infrastructure is their focus, and they're the sort of people who've been hired for their capability to do that.
So just through you, Mr. Chair, and to you, I'd be interested in knowing what we can do to move a pilot forward.
Okay, I might just defer to Mr. Quinn and explain what work is underway now in terms of smarter pricing, which is maybe not taking into account Paul's proposal, and how that could be taken into account, and the possibility of pilot. Where would that come out of, if at all, Mr. Quinn?
Yeah, so the smarter pricing project, you're aware, is one of the projects that has spawned off the Auckland Transport Alignment work. We have a team working on that now, and I know Mr. Manette met with Peter, the project director, last week, which is great, and Peter was really receptive. I've talked to him about it since.
Who is that, Peter?
Nelson.
Nelson.
And the cool thing about the project is, like the Auckland Transport Alignment one, this is us, Auckland Transport, NZTA, MOT, Treasury in the same room working together. So what comes out of this, we have a good prospect of something being done, and we know sometimes that doesn't always occur. So this has been referred to them. Mr. Manette and a few others have written to us about varying ideas, and so one of the things, I'm the chair of the steering group of this, one of the things we've done is made sure we have a way to receive ideas and work out where they fit, and are there things we should be doing more urgently. And so that's in the melting pot as we speak. I'm not sure I agree with your view on a year, but I think also until we actually do some work, and I'm the first one in the world to say we should get an app for that. I'm accused of it all the time. I think you'll find the app you're assuming is more sophisticated than we intuitively think. So the pilot needs to have some level of robustness around it to make sure it would work, and I'm sure you'd agree with that. So, look, the team are working on this amongst a whole range of things, and as I say, we've made sure there's a process to receive ideas, because the project's role is to assimilate all the options and to think about what really will make the best long-term meaningful difference to the Auckland flows. I understand your comment on Auckland Transport. I think it's a little unfair. There is in this, if they can minimise the spend through other interventions, which is what the whole process to date's been about, they're there for that. They just need to be convinced, and I agree with you, a pilot's the way to find out. They need to be convinced that the intervention will be worth the investment, and as you say, a pilot's the best way to find out.
So the only comment I just briefly made back is that the year came from Peter Nielsen.
Yeah, no, I get that. There is a whole range of work to do. The team right now are deeply focused on a clear agreement to get to our Mayor and Deputy Mayor and the Ministers a report quite soon, which will then spawn where the action goes. But we can accelerate from that point. I think distracting them right now away from their first goal, which is to get the first draft out, or the first report out, which will then enable bodies like this to decide what the next steps are. So assurance from me that it's in the mix.
Okay, thank you. I've got questions from Councillors Simpson, Watson and Cooper, and then we'll wrap it at that. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Look, thank you for your presentation, and certainly using technology to mitigate congestion is something that I totally support. So my question to you is, have you seen this applied anywhere overseas?
I'm working with people overseas on the general conceptual idea of reverse tolls. There has been for many, many years sort of an idea of rewarding people for doing things differently, but it's never been tried at scale. And so, to my knowledge, nobody has tried a reverse toll at scale to solve a regional transport or a corridor transport problem.
And if I may, Mr Chairman, what countries are you actually talking to at the moment?
The main country is the US.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Very interesting presentation, Paul. Thank you. Just a rather specific question on that, on the paying regime. In an instance where perhaps people are getting picked up and going to a park and ride or such thing like that, are you thinking in terms of reward? Are you thinking in terms of like a monetary payment or a reserved space or whatever has perhaps a benefit in terms of either time or access or money or three?
Well, I kind of say yes to that, because it is a matter of balancing out. We want to spend the least amount of money we can whilst rewarding people at sufficient level to make the change. And so if there's, for example, an HOV lane, a T3 lane you call it, say a T3 lane, that's a pretty big benefit. But people aren't using those because, there is not enough or something for some reason. So you might be figuring out how to get people started and then not rewarding them very much every day, but just maybe some sort of a reward for actually getting going. But you'd be balancing it to achieve the best outcome for everybody concerned.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Cooper.
I suppose it's probably not so much a question, just a little bit, Mr Quinn was saying, I think we really need to be getting the work that you've been doing for many years. You've been coming to successive councils before amalgamation now, and I think, I guess the question is, you must be getting frustrated, is we need to be looking at things differently, because we just are in a pipeline of just building more and it's not changing. And so I think we've got to change the way we look at it. And I would like to see, if possible, not so much going to AT, but our own transport strategy people,
involved.
And really working with these ideas. So
I'd be totally happy to sit down together and work it through in detail.
You'd be happy to do that?
Absolutely,
Good, there's
totally,
my question.
yes.
Thank you.
I'd love to.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, you want to just remind them of that?
Yeah, so the transport strategy team are embedded in this group as well.
Great,
So
thank you.
yeah, you'll get a balanced advice from them.
Thank you.
Paul, I know you'd like us to tick off a pilot right now, but we can't do that.
Didn't think you would.
But I'll put these up, and it's moved by councillor Walker. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Councillor Fletcher, thank you. And thank you, Paul.
Thank you for your time.
So your proposal will be referred to that group, which includes quite a broad range of participants, which we'll be keeping an eye on. Thank you. All those, and it's moved and seconded, all those in favour say aye, contrary no. Declare that carried. Appreciate it, Paul.
Thank you.
Next in the public forum today, we have Dr. Mels Barton of the Tree Council. And this follows submissions via email and orally to myself and Councillor Penny Hulse on concerns the Tree Council has relating to the protection of trees or lack of protection of trees, changes that have occurred on the ground, depletion of tree canopy following the blanket protections being uplifted, etc. But Mels, thank you for making the approaches and coming here today.
Kia ora, councillors. Thank you for having me. Yes, I'm from the Tree Council, and I'm here to talk to you today about protecting our so-called protected trees, because this is the remains of the scheduled pecans in Avondale. We all know what happened to those. In case you're not aware, there are various legal mechanisms in which council is supposed to protect trees, plus, of course, the ones that are on public land, which have protection. I think you need to know that since the tree protection came off, over 90% of urban trees have no protection whatsoever anymore. 90%. So of the 10%, these are the ways in which you can protect them, and you do protect them, supposedly. Of those, you might note that only one of those is permanent protection. All of those other protections can be removed by consent. And that includes your scheduled notable trees, which are supposed in your staff's comments to be the best of the best of the best trees. Allegedly 6,000 across the city. We estimate there's probably less than half those still in the ground. Schedule 10 itself, the best of the best of the best of our trees, our heritage assets. Schedule 10 and the Unitary plan are wrong. They are inaccurate. They are inaccurate compared with what is in the ground. They do not even reflect each other. So one is not reflecting what the other says, and nor do the maps. So in 3 places that you hold legally binding information about legally protecting these trees is all wrong. And compared to what is in the ground, it is also wrong. We have done an audit in Avondale since the pecans came down, which demonstrated that 2/3 of the schedule in Avondale is incorrect. That is horrifying. Horrifying. You do not know where these trees are. How can you protect them? What you need to do urgently is ground truth the schedule. Send people round to check where these trees are, get it right. GPS locate where these trees are, get it right, and update the Unitary plan text and the maps to accurately reflect where these trees actually are so that you can legally protect them. And while you're doing it, you could stick a little label on each of them to say this is a scheduled tree. This is a heritage tree. It would have huge benefits for letting the community know that we have these protected trees and how important they are. And when an arborist turns up to cut them down, he's going to go, oh, this is a protected tree. But that is actually the tip of the iceberg as to what is happening to our protected trees. All of those others are protected by consent. They can be removed by consent. The reality of what is happening, and the Snells Beach Norfolk pine is the worst example in the region of late of what is happening. Non-notified consent applications, a default yes to anybody who puts in a consent application to remove a tree for any reason whatsoever. Default yes. Tick a box, off we go, cut it down. No questions asked, no public process, no input, no conversation, no appeal possible, just yes. Let's get rid of them. What we estimate has happened in the last 5 years since the tree protection rules were taken off is you have lost 1/3 of the tree cover in this city. 1/3. That means in another 10 years, you won't have any trees left. And the reason why is because we have so many of these default non-notified yes consent applications coming in to remove those protected trees, the only 10% that are protected, plus the 90% that you don't need a consent to remove. Someone can just walk out with a chainsaw and cut it down tomorrow, no questions asked. This is a Local Government Information Act request for consent applications over 2 years for trees. I've left a copy here for the Mayor to see. This is page after page, double-sided, of consent applications to remove trees, 99.9% of them non-notified. This is not for one tree at a time, this is for hundreds of trees. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trees. This is your problem. We need a dedicated tree helpline. I spent 4 hours on the phone to council trying to save this yellow pahutakawa in Mangere Bridge on Friday. Have any of you ever seen a yellow pahutakawa?
Yeah.
Awesome. I doubt it. There's only a handful across the city. It was going to be cut down for a bus shelter. I'm hopeful we can manage to save this tree, but it has no protection. We need a dedicated tree helpline so that somebody ringing up does not have to take 4 hours to try and stop the chainsaws from running. You need to reopen the schedule to nominations and have rolling updates for that schedule every year so that we can get more trees onto it. You need to lower the bar for qualification. Something like the Snell's Beach tree might possibly have got onto the schedule, but quite frankly, that is the bar you're looking at right now. 150 years old and planted by the Queen, that's it. Interim protection for nominated trees. Otherwise, once you say you're going to protect it, someone just cuts it down. Give incentives to landowners to keep trees. Give them some rates relief, a couple of $100 so they can pay somebody to sweep the leaves up, for God's sake. Majority of the consent applications we end up in court over are for people who don't want to do the maintenance on scheduled trees on their property. It's pathetic. Just give them a bit of money to let them do it. And penalties for illegal removal and mitigation against removal of trees need to be substantial, not a $300 slap on the wrist. And consents for trees must be free. You are now charging people $250 to lodge a consent application to remove a tree, and the slap on the wrist is $300. What do you think they're going to do? Are they going to apply for a consent? No, they're just going to take the tree down and take the risk. I'm hopeful that on Thursday we will have a change of government. And if we do, I would expect this council to be lobbying that government to change the RMA and reinstate tree protection before our cities across the country lose all our trees. This is why you keep trees. I'm not going to read it out. They are worth millions to our city in the benefits and the services that they provide to you, treating water and pollution and stopping flooding and keeping the slopes intact. They even improve the value of your house by 15%. Did anybody know that?
Yep.
It's too late when they're gone. It takes 2 minutes to remove them. These examples in Milford and in Avondale happened in the last 2 weeks. This is what is happening on a daily basis right the way across our city. If we don't move now, it is going to be too late for our urban forest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mels. So members, just to be aware that we have instructed a review, but it's limited, of the notable trees schedule. I think it was the August meeting of this committee, but that's for to address the errors and anomalies. Mel's goes a lot further than that in her request, but I'm suggesting that this is an issue that multiple committees, both Councillor Holz's Environment Community Committee, are concerned about. I've heard from a number of members of this committee expressing concern, and I would be proposing, but I'm happy for somebody else to move, that we seek a report on this, and it might come to this planning committee and or Environment Community.
Yeah.
Can I? And I'll come to you very shortly, Councillor Holz. So I'm happy to amend that slightly, but we do need to do further work on this. This is an issue that's in our faces, as Mel's reminding us, and it is quite a serious issue from my anecdotal evidence as I walk, ride and travel across Auckland. So, question, Councillor Holz.
Thank you, and I do have a question that I'd just like to comment. Mels, can you just give us that rather horrifying figure again of, did I hear the scheduled trees that your sense is that half our scheduled trees are actually still standing. Was that the...
We think so. I mean, we did this audit in Avondale where we went round and checked every single tree that was supposed to be on the schedule, and half of them were either listed on the wrong property, or maybe it was a group of trees and only one of them was left standing out of the group of 10 or whatever that was supposed to be scheduled. Or so basically the inaccuracy of the schedule we found in Avondale was 2/3 wrong. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean 2/3 of those trees aren't there. It just means that legally they've got no protection. If they're listed on the schedule on one address and they're actually standing on another one, there's nothing to stop someone going and cutting them down. So, you know, getting that schedule has got to be accurate. And as we saw with the Avondale pecans incident, if you don't actually GPS the location of those trees and have the map and the unitary plan actually reflecting where they are, that's what people assume, that little triangle represents where they are, but it doesn't. No. It's just randomly placed on that block somewhere. And so that's exactly what happened in Avondale, because the block had been subdivided and the triangle ended up in one of the other subdivisions. And it's like, oh, well, no, there's nothing in your subdivision, in your property. So yeah, it's about getting those three things: the text for that property, the schedule itself, and the maps accurate with reality.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I completely endorse your idea of a report. I think it's a three-pronged report, if we can just be really clear. I think the work that's underway to audit our schedule is utterly critical, and as we audit, can we put the little signs on the trees at the same time? That would be both practical and I think an exceedingly good idea. Secondly, we need to clean up. As I said at a workshop yesterday, I was responsible for doing the unitary plan, and now as the environmental chair, I'm responsible for cleaning up the impacts of the unitary plan. We broke our hearts that we lost our blanket tree protection rule. That was, in my mind, quite bonkers and a very bad outcome. We tried to stop it, but we lost it. I'd like us to look at a report, an omnibus report that looks at what we will try and re-establish should we have an opportunity to revisit some of those RMA changes. And thirdly, Mr. Chair, we've got our urban forest strategy work that's happening. I would very much like us to wind some of the work that the Tree Council's doing into that urban forest strategy work, so that we're not having a series of separate work streams, that we wind it into one, the outcome to be that we increase our urban forest cover in the Auckland region, and these are all the tools and work programs that go alongside it. So if you're prepared to move something along those lines, I'm very supportive of that. Thank you.
So
you have.
In the red, could you look at that in the red and see if it covers?
I'll just put my glasses on.
Thank you. And Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. I'll just make a statement first, and essentially that is that what we see in Auckland is a crisis, and it's akin to an ice age moving across the landscape and obliterating our trees. I've got a few questions, Mels, and I know that you mentioned a third of the tree cover, and I'm assuming that's, you know, many parts of the city is being wiped out. I'm assuming that a significant part of that tree cover is not just small trees, but arguably mature trees, and I just seek some comment from you on that.
We think it's mostly mature trees, because it's those big ones that are in the way.
Okay.
They're in the way and causing the problems, so it's the big ones mainly, and anything that's small, then as soon as it gets a bit big, it's then in the way. So it's the big ones that are going. The ones that are providing you with all those services and benefits.
Sure.
The big ones.
The other question I've got just goes to resourcing, because I know the resourcing within council is limited. Now, in the past, and I'm going back to the tree protection days, a number of councils used to have a collaborative relationship with the Tree Council, and that was a conduit to tap into a significant resource that's there of people across Auckland that are concerned about trees. Is that resource still available in that collaborative relationship? Because that may well assist our officers in actually reporting and putting things together.
We'd love to work collaboratively with the council on protecting trees. And
Okay.
we made submissions to every single local board through their plan to do a labelling project, for example. You know, I mean, it would be easier if the heritage arborist just did it while they're doing the audit and slapped a little label on each one. But we actually thought that it would be good. It would be good to have a month in the year, maybe, where you had a bigger label that told you what this tree did and why it had been protected and all the rest of it. You know, so that the community gets ownership of these assets and understands why they're important to them. So I still think that that would be beneficial over, over say a month a year. You go out and you label all your scheduled trees with a huge label that talks about that particular tree and its story. But to have a permanent little tag on there that says this is a protected tree, it probably only cost you like $2 per tree. So
Sure,
that would be a really amazing
that.
thing to do.
And the reason that I ask that question, Mr. Chair, is it goes to B. I would hope that in the reporting back, we consider the full spectrum of what we need to do, over and above, conceivably, our own resources, because I would suggest that there is a very significant community resource available to assist council, and we need to identify and work with that, rather than just work off our own very limited circumstances.
Can I just also tell you about an app that we have just developed? We'll be launching it on Thursday this week at our AGM. It's an app that we've developed to record trees and tree loss. So what we're hoping, obviously, is that all the arborists will pick this up so that in their daily work they can record the trees that they're taking out, which will ground truth your LiDAR remote sensing information about the loss of tree cover across the city, which is like the broad brush. But what we're hoping is that the public and the arborists and the industry will pick this app up and will then go and record tree by tree by tree by tree what that actually means. I mean, obviously, we know that we've lost a hell of a lot of mature trees already. It's taken us a year to develop this app because we've got no money. But we're there now. We're ready to go. So it would be really awesome, if we could encourage everybody to use this app and effectively have the whole city recording what is going on with our urban forest. Not just trees we're losing, but also trees that we think are really special and that deserve protection. It would be really good. But it's implementing some kind of interim protection is what's so important. Because even when, the yellow Pahudakawa is a really good example, that tree has got no protection. It's on private land. If the homeowner wants it gone, it's gone. There's nothing we can do about it. It's one of the rarest trees that we have. If we could have some interim protection until that can be scheduled and put in the Unitary plan, that would be massive. So it's being able to have something as a holding pattern until that assessment is done, until that process is gone through, that someone can't actually just chop that tree down. Because otherwise you're going to have a slaughter. If you say you're going to change the tree rules, you're going to have a wholesale slaughter.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I congratulate you on your app. I do support private property rights, but I will say something that you may not be aware of, and that is there are some local boards that have funds available for people who have large significant trees on their property that need assistance with those trees to look after the maintenance. I know the Ōrākei local board has been one that has done that, and I suggest that you potentially contact them and get their guidelines and maybe see if other local boards can support what they're doing, because that is actually quite localised on the ground. It's trees that are in communities have special places for those communities, and it's often that the people who live in and around those trees have more relationship with them than potentially people from other parts of Auckland, and I think that's actually quite a good thing to do, so you might like to look at that as well.
Thanks, that's great.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. Thanks, Mels, for your and the Tree Council's diligence in this work. I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, if in this report, there will be a significant regulatory impact, and this is happening in the regulatory space all the time. We can't blame our consent staff if the maps are wrong. But I also think we've got to have those options of how do we make these with scheduled trees. I'm just horrified that we don't even notify those, because they're scheduled for the benefit of the public, because they are important and special and do have meaning, and that shouldn't just be something that's private issue. It should be public. But also I just want to, and I hope the Mayor can hear me, Mr. Mayor, is that we are already had to have huge cuts in funding for our regulatory and compliance staff in the last annual plan. And if we want to implement any of these sorts of recommendations that'll come, they'll have regulatory compliance costs associated. And so if and I think I'm speaking to everybody, if we want these things to be happening, we have to pay for them. And so we can't squeeze any more blood out of a stone. But I mean, I'm really pleased about this. If you look at, there's a huge giant eucalyptus in Williams Road in Hobsonville, and it's got a plaque on it. In Waitakere Days, we put a little brass plaque next to it, so everybody that walks past knows that that's a heritage tree. And, you know, and it's on private property, and the people there love it. But if it's got that plaque on it, anybody that buys that knows it, and I think that's really important. So, for me, thanks, Mels. I think we do need to do some work on this.
Mayor Goff.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr Chairman, and thanks, Mels. I think some of the stuff that you've drawn to our attention is pretty concerning. And, you know, the inaccuracy of the scheduling of trees removes any ability to legally protect if you haven't got it listed at the right property address. So I think we need to deal with that. But what it highlights is that scheduling individual trees is awkward and it's costly. And I take on board Councillor Cooper's comment because we don't have money coming out our ears. So what we really need to do is to try to get a sensible provision put back in the RMA as we've discussed before. I want to make one comment and then ask the question about the RMA. My comment is this is sad news. The good news is that every day at the moment we're planting 1,400 additional native plants under the Million Trees program. But a seedling doesn't replace a tree that's 80 years old, so I understand that. But in 80 years, when none of us are here, the impact of that planting we're doing now will really make a difference, and we'll keep doing that. The question that I've got is, can you outline to us what you're proposing in terms of the nature of the amendment to the RMA? It might not take us back to where we were, but it needs to be a whole lot better than the protections that were totally stripped out in, I think, 2009 and 2012. So what specifically are you proposing for the RMA?
Okay, so I'll just comment first on the Million Trees programme, and yes, a sapling does not replace an 80-year-old tree, but I think the danger that you have with that as well is that what's the protection on those trees you're planting right now? You know, as soon as they
most of them are on
start...
council reserve land.
Yeah, but a hell of a lot of these, Phil, are to remove trees on council reserve land. A hell of a lot of these are from parks and berms and public land. They're not just on private land. So you're removing your own trees as well as allowing the public to remove their trees, all non-notified, all with no discussion. 70 trees non-notified from Cornwall Park, 70 trees. Only 2 of them being notified right now, slaughter. So that's what's going on, the reality of it. So the protection of those trees to enable them to get to 80 years old, enable them to get to 80 years old and start providing those benefits is very dubious compared to what the council's actual practice on the ground is going on right now, because it is not about protecting trees. It's about saying yes to anybody who wants to remove trees, and that includes your own staff. So it's about an attitude shift in terms of having a default no, justify that, or publicly notify it, rather than default yes, just get rid of it. That's what has to shift here if you're going to retain trees. It's not just about the schedule that is this much of the problem. It's about the non-notified consent applications on a daily basis. That's the big problem here. So regarding the RMA, yes, of course, we're trying to go for like a middle ground that we think that would be more palatable, if you like, to the politicians in government about putting some tree protection back into the RMA. We can see it's gone way too far. Like, we have the evidence now, and when your LiDAR data for the last 5 years comes in, I'm confident that it is going to support what we are seeing on the ground, which is, we think, 1/3 of your urban forest has now gone in the last 5 years. So we think that data will support that assumption, and that is way, way beyond what I think was imagined. Maybe it wasn't, but it's the worst nightmare. And so, yes, a middle ground, the details of which are still in draft, so I'm not going to try and go through those today. I think that we still need to continue that conversation, and actually I think it would be really useful for us to continue that conversation with the industry, So with the arborists who are seeing the issues on a daily basis, to get them round the table and discuss the ins and outs of exactly what would work in a practical level in terms of protecting trees in some kind of general way. And then, of course, talking with whoever it is that ends up in government about who's going to support that, what it is they would support and why wouldn't they support. So, you know, we've a way to go with that bill, I think, and we really salute you, Phil, for your work on that, to initiate that before you left government. It is terribly important in that opposition role that you had to put that on the table and to start work on that draft bill. So we really thank you for your work on that, because it is now well overdue, and we hope that it won't be in vain, and that we can now get that on the table and get it passed and get this slaughter stopped before it is too late for our city and for all the cities in New Zealand, because this is what is happening in all the cities in New Zealand. It's not just here. It's development at the expense of our environment, and that does not create a healthy environment in which people live. You know, quite the opposite.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Mels. We're way over time. Mayor Phil, did you have anything to conclude?
Oh, no, just, look, I agree absolutely. When you cut down trees, that pecan tree those trees should never have gone. That was a bad mistake, and it was a mistake, but it was a mistake that our officers made. So our regret for that. But we need those mature trees. They're part of our landscape. They're part of our heritage. They're part of our history. So thank you for your work on it.
I think we can see the pecans as a gift to give us the power to do something about it.
Okay.
Let's not have them die in vain.
We are well over time, members, and I'm always reminded to keep to time. So I've got two more questions, Councillor Hulse and then Councillor Sayers, and then we'll conclude.
Just wanted to suggest, you asked me to comment, Mr Chair. I'm just going to suggest that we are a little bit more finessed in what we're asking for in recommendation B, and I think it is a joint staff report to planning, regulatory and environment, so that we actually start to look at this as a combined and collective approach, because we need an overarching outcome. What do we want to do? Stop trees being chopped down unnecessarily and grow our urban forest. That's the outcome. The way to do this is through regulation, through actions like the million trees, and through appropriate funding in our going into our LTP. Because I do agree with my ex-Eco-City colleague, Councillor Linda Cooper, unless we put the money in the budget to fund the free resource consents, which we chopped out to save money, that is the unintended consequence of budget cuts. You can't do free resource consents if you chop the budget. So we need to start getting a bit joined up here going into the LTP. Regulation, funding and planning and compliance. So I think if we do a three-way report, it will be more useful. Thank you.
On the ground, running around.
Rather
Just
than
for clarification, because I don't want to make a meal of this, because I don't see the point of having the same report going into three places, because the listing at each committee is different.
Exactly. Sorry, that's exactly my point, Mr Chair. So it's saying, let's do one report that brings all of those issues together. The regulatory bit then can go off to regulatory, the impact and the policy associated with urban forest goes to me, and the please change the Resource Management Act immediately goes to you. And I think otherwise we risk, you know, this losing the connected nature of this.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and being mindful of the time there, I'm just wondering, perhaps with your indulgence, or perhaps more with the indulgence of the mover and seconder of the motion, if we could just add in a vote of thanks, Councillor Walker. And particularly, I particularly want that added in because of the effort that you made for Snell's Beach, coming up there so promptly and helping that community with that 150-year-old Norfolk, and working so closely with people like Mr McLaughlin and Michelle up there and the local community. So thank you for that.
Thank
No
you.
worries. Thank you.
Mels. I think we've canvassed this extremely well. No, it's a big issue. You've addressed it extremely well, and you've addressed it with good, solid evidence, as is always coming from the Tree Council. So thank you to the Tree Council, and in particular yourself. It's moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, Mels.
Thank you all so much.
Sometimes you just have to.
Members, we'll now come